Few filmmakers have shaped world cinema quite like Ingmar Bergman. His films, steeped in silence, faith, and inner torment, explored the vast spaces between life and death. "This God or Christ is marvelous," he once cried, "and you are a dirty snake. It is not good for your feeling. But if you feel you have to do as good as possible under these circumstances, and this love and this good doesn't exist, love and loneliness." By the time of his death in 2007, Bergman had become synonymous with the language of introspection. Yet behind the stern image of the Swedish auteur was a passionate moviegoer, a man who filled notebooks with thoughts about films that touched him deeply. Though he never published a formal ranking of favorites, interviews, diaries, and archival conversations reveal a handful of movies he returned to throughout his life. These weren't chosen for prestige or fashion. They were films that pierced his soul, that reflected his fascination with morality, spirituality, and human frailty. From the visionary mysticism of Tarkovsky to the tragic poetry of Fellini, from Kurosawa's moral puzzles to Wilder's sharp dissection of fame, Bergman's favorites trace a map of cinema's conscience. In this journey, we will uncover the 6 films that Bergman cherished most, a voyage across continents, decades, and emotions. Each film is a mirror revealing not only the genius of its director, but also the restless spirit of Bergman himself. 6. Sunset Boulevard, 1950. Billy Wilder. So when Norma says, "Tell him without me you wouldn't have any job, because without me there wouldn't be any Paramount studio," Joe can only reply, "You're right, Miss Desmond." When Ingmar Bergman praised American cinema late in life, he wasn't speaking in generalities. He was remembering the films that had shaped his sense of storytelling and rhythm. Chief among them was Billy Wilder's Sunset Boulevard, the 1950 film that tore apart Hollywood's own illusions. Bergman may have spent most of his career on an isolated Swedish island, but he carried a quiet admiration for Hollywood craftsmanship. "The American way of making movies," he once said, "is very vital and stimulating. I've learned a great deal from it." That vitality found its purest expression for him in Wilder's acidic masterpiece. The film opens with a dead man floating face down in a swimming pool. The corpse narrates its own story, flashing back to the chain of vanity and delusion that led to his death. Joe Gillis, a down-on-his-luck screenwriter, hides his car in the garage of a decaying mansion on Sunset Boulevard and meets Norma Desmond, a silent film queen who never accepted that the world moved on. She lives surrounded by faded photographs and her pet chimpanzee's coffin, worshipped only by her butler Max, himself a relic from her glory days. When Norma hires Joe to polish her script, he trades independence for comfort, descending into a gilded cage. Their relationship spirals into obsession, jealousy, and ultimately murder. Bergman never wrote an essay on Sunset Boulevard, yet its fingerprints appear in his work. He admired Wilder's precision, the way every scene balanced irony and compassion, cruelty and pity. "American filmmakers taught me clarity," he told an interviewer. "They know how to tell a story." Wilder's film embodies that clarity. Stark lighting, meticulous blocking, bold narration that turns cynicism into poetry. Bergman's persona and Scenes from a Marriage would later echo this blend of theatrical intimacy and emotional exposure. He was fascinated, too, by what Sunset Boulevard said about aging and delusion. Wilder's portrait of Norma Desmond's descent resonated with Bergman's recurring theme of artists facing irrelevance. Like Desmond, Bergman's characters often confront the collapse of identity, the actress in Persona, the priest in Winterlight, the writer in Hour of the Wolf. To Bergman, Sunset Boulevard wasn't just satire. It was tragedy masquerading as comedy. "Behind laughter, there is fear," he once said. Norma's grand entrance, "All right, Mr. DeMille, I'm ready for my close-up," embodies exactly that duality, the horror of denial presented as performance. In interviews, Bergman grouped Wilder with Ernst Lubitsch and George Cukor as masters of style with soul. He admired how Wilder could frame human weakness without contempt. In Sunset Boulevard, vanity becomes pathos, ambition becomes madness, and fame turns fatal. All themes that aligned with Bergman's belief that art exposes the masks people wear. Nominated for 11 Oscars and winner of 3, including Best Screenplay, The film's value for Bergman lay not in trophies but in truth. It captured the fragility of artists who live for applause and die when it fades. Fear, he confessed, haunted him. Why would a director known for spiritual despair and Nordic silence revere a Hollywood noir? Was Bergman responding to Wilder's storytelling craft, or to the universal loneliness hiding beneath Norma Desmond's glamour? 5. The Passion of Joan of Arc, 1928. Carl Theodor Dreyer. When Ingmar Bergman spoke about the directors who most haunted him, Carl Theodor Dreyer always surfaced, sometimes in tones of awe, sometimes even irritation. I like Dreyer in a protesting way, he confessed, meaning that Dreyer's intensity unsettled him even as it inspired him. Nowhere was that power clearer than in The Passion of Joan of Arc, the 1928 silent masterpiece built almost entirely from the trembling face of René Jean Falconetti. Bergman first encountered it as a young man. The film's raw spiritual energy would reverberate through his own career for decades. Dreyer tells the story everyone knows, the trial and execution of Joan of Arc, but strips away all spectacle. There are no battlefields, no sweeping vistas, only faces. Joan's face, pale and luminous, fills the screen as she is interrogated by clergymen whose features twist between piety and cruelty. The film unfolds almost in real time as Joan is bullied, tricked, and condemned, culminating in her immolation at the stake. Every shot feels carved from anguish. Dreyer's camera hovers close enough to catch tears clinging to eyelashes, pores glistening with sweat. For Bergman, this was cinema as spiritual surgery, cutting directly into the human soul. Some of his pictures infected me, he admitted literally. Dreyer's obsession with suffering and salvation infected Bergman's own vision of faith. Without Dreyer, there might be no The Seventh Seal or Winter Light, films which also reduce vast theological questions to intimate human expressions. Bergman compared Dreyer to a priest conducting a ceremony. The audience, willingly or not, becomes his congregation. Dreyer's stark white sets, absence of makeup, and emphasis on light reflecting off faces shaped Bergman's later collaboration with Sven Nykvist. When Bergman filmed close-ups that seemed to trap his actors' souls, Liv Ullmann's silent gaze in Persona, Ingrid Thulin's tearful monologue in Cries and Whispers, he was echoing Dreyer's visual grammar. After seeing Joan of Arc, he confessed, I realized what a face could express when stripped of everything else. Bergman felt a kinship with Dreyer's willingness to confront the divine through doubt. The Passion of Joan of Arc is not about faith rewarded, but faith tested to breaking. Joan's isolation mirrors the spiritual loneliness Bergman's characters would later endure. The priest unable to feel God's presence, the knight facing death's silence. Where Dreyer found transcendence in martyrdom, Bergman found uncertainty. Yet both saw doubt as the crucible of belief. In later years, Bergman described the film as unbearably pure. It frightened him because it revealed cinema's ultimate potential, to remove all distractions until only truth remained. Dreyer's unflinching empathy and Falconetti's near-mythic performance convinced him that acting could achieve the sacred. Often screened with live choral accompaniment, Bergman preferred it in silence. It is like watching prayer itself, he told a colleague. For him, the film transcended dialogue or sound. It was the closest cinema ever came to capturing the mystery of faith. 4. The Phantom Carriage, 1921. Victor Sjöström. For Ingmar Bergman, The Phantom Carriage was more than a film, it was a revelation. He first saw Victor Sjöström's 1921 silent masterpiece as a boy of 12 or 13, long before he dreamed of directing. The story terrified, mystified, and moved him all at once. David Home, a violent alcoholic, mocks the legend until he is struck down at midnight and learns it is true. Guided by his dead friend George, he relives the destruction he has caused. His abuse of his wife Anna, the suffering of Salvation Army worker sister Edith, the collapse of his family under drunken cruelty. Only when he sees Anna preparing to poison herself and their children does David beg for a final chance to make amends. In the climax, time freezes, allowing him to stop the tragedy and vow to change his life. Decades later, Bergman could still recall the sensation. Sjöström's balance between darkness and grace deeply influenced his later writing. In Wild Strawberries, The Seventh Seal, and Fanny and Alexander, characters confront guilt and mortality in ways that echo Holmes' haunting journey. Even Bergman's recurring theme of the silent god, a deity who watches but does not intervene, has roots in Sjöström's ghostly carriage driver who enforces divine justice without words. When Bergman became Sweden's most famous filmmaker, he returned the favor. In 1957, he cast the 78-year-old Victor Sjöström as the lead in Wild Strawberries. The role of the aging professor confronting his past was, in Bergman's eyes, a tribute to the man who had given him his cinematic awakening. On set, he treated Sjöström with reverence, later calling him the father of Swedish cinema. In Bergman's personal office, a framed still from the Phantom Carriage hung for decades, a constant reminder of the movie that opened his eyes to the power of film. He believed Sjöström's fusion of realism and the supernatural proved that art could bridge the physical and metaphysical worlds. By the end of his life, Bergman still spoke of the film with undimmed awe. "It's not about ghosts," he said softly. "It's about the soul." 3. Rashomon, 1950. Akira Kurosawa. When Ingmar Bergman first saw Rashomon, he knew he was witnessing a turning point in film history. Akira Kurosawa's 1950 masterpiece didn't just change Japanese cinema. It changed the way the world thought about truth. For Bergman, who spent his career exploring the blurry line between illusion and reality, Rashomon was a revelation. Kurosawa was a filmmaker who never repeated himself, he said, admiring his ability to reinvent his voice without losing integrity. Set in 12th century Japan, the film commences in a downpour at a ruined gate where a woodcutter, a priest, and a cynical commoner seek shelter. They tell of a shocking crime that has been committed, a samurai found dead, his wife assaulted, for conflicting testimonies ensuing from the bandit Tajimaru, the wife, the dead samurai through a medium, and finally the woodcutter himself. Each version contradicts the others, revealing how pride, shame, and ego distort memory. The truth becomes unknowable. For Bergman, this narrative structure, one story told from multiple contradictory perspectives, was revolutionary. It showed that cinema could be subjective, he said in an interview, that every image could be a point of view. That idea echoed through Persona and Cries and Whispers, where he explored fractured identities and unreliable memories. Both directors were obsessed with human perception, what we see, what we hide, what we choose to believe. Beyond structure, Bergman loved Kurosawa's emotional depth, a way philosophy balanced with visceral energy. Dazzling sunlight through forest canopy, shifting camera angles, and bold editing rhythm gave the film hallucinatory intensity. "He paints with movement," Bergman said. "Each frame breathes with life, even when it tells of death." Cinematographer Kazuo Miyagawa used shafts of light and shadow as metaphors for truth itself, a technique Bergman later echoed with Sven Nykvist. Thematically, Rashomon resonated with Bergman's spiritual skepticism. Morality and truth are fluid, shaped by perspective. Priests losing faith, lovers caught in lies, artists blinded by ego. The human being is the greatest mystery, Bergman remarked. We live behind our own masks. In that sense, Rashomon and Persona are cinematic siblings, forcing audiences to confront the chaos beneath human identity. Bergman also admired Kurosawa's discipline across genres, samurai epics, thrillers, intimate dramas, while maintaining emotional honesty. He was never enslaved by his own style, Bergman noted. That's what makes him great. In the end, Rashomon left Bergman humbled and inspired. Cinema could mirror the uncertainty of life itself. Truth like light through leaves, always shifting. 2. La Strada, 1954. Federico Fellini. Bergman and Federico Fellini were two sides of the same cinematic coin. One probing despair and silence, the other exalting life's chaos and color. Though their worlds looked different, Bergman adored Fellini's imagination. I love him both as a person and as a director, he said. His films give me childlike joy. Among them, La Strada held a special, enduring place in his heart. Released in 1954, Fellini's bittersweet parable tells of Gelsomina, a simple young woman sold by her mother to the cruel strongman Zampano. They travel Italy's back roads, performing circus acts for coins. Gelsomina's innocence collides with Zampano's brutality, yet her purity touches everyone, especially Il Motto, the carefree tightrope clown who believes everything has meaning, even a pebble on the road. When Zampano kills Il Motto in jealous rage and later abandons Gelsomina, she wastes away, her spirit broken. Years later, Zampano hears her song on a seaside breeze and breaks down sobbing. A rare glimpse of grace from a man consumed by pride. For Bergman, La Strada was far more than melodrama. It was an act of faith in humanity. He revisited it late in life, saying it restored his belief that cinema could still move him. Fellini's fusion of tragedy and innocence struck a chord with the Swedish master whose own films hover between cruelty and compassion. Fellini's world is the world of the soul, Bergman wrote. Terrifying, beautiful, and absurd. He joked that Fellini lived closer to heaven while he himself dwelled in the cellars of the soul. Watching La Strada, he admired how Fellini transformed pain into poetry without cynicism. Gelsomina's haunting trumpet theme, composed by Nino Rota, embodied for Bergman the possibility of redemption through art, music expressing what dialogue never could. Their friendship was real. They met at festivals, exchanged letters of admiration. Fellini said Bergman's discipline would bring him back to earth if he got lost in fantasy. Bergman admitted Fellini reminded him not to fear wonder. "We are both children," he said. "Only his toys are brighter." Bergman, who spent decades dissecting guilt, was deeply moved by the film's redemptive arc. 1. Andrei Rublev, 1966. Andrei Tarkovsky. If one filmmaker touched Ingmar Bergman on a spiritual level, it was Andrei Tarkovsky. Bergman never hid his admiration. "Tarkovsky, for me, is the greatest," he declared. He moves naturally in the room of dreams. Among all Tarkovsky's films, Andrei Rublev stood out as the one that left Bergman encouraged and stimulated, as if Tarkovsky had found a cinematic language Bergman himself had always searched for but never fully discovered. Released in 1966, Andrei Rublev is not a conventional biopic. Instead of a straightforward chronicle of the 15th century icon painter, Tarkovsky crafts a sprawling mosaic of episodes: war, faith, despair, rebirth, set against the brutality of medieval Russia. Rublev, played by Anatoly Solzhenitsyn, wanders plague-stricken villages, witnesses human cruelty, and questions his divine purpose. By the film's end, he rediscovers his calling, painting icons once again as bells ring in the distance, a sound that feels like the awakening of the human soul itself. Bergman was moved not just by the story but by the method. Tarkovsky rejected tidy explanations. The film unfolds like a dream full of silences, symbols, and elemental images. Fire, rain, light breaking through clouds. Film is closest to music and to dreams, Bergman said, and Tarkovsky seemed to prove it. He told journalists that Tarkovsky's work liberated him, reminding him that film could be pure poetry without apology. In Bergman's eyes, Andrei Rublev expressed everything he had tried to explore: the struggle between faith and doubt, art and responsibility, guilt and grace. Tarkovsky's monk, like Bergman's priests in Winter Light or the Night in The Seventh Seal, confronts the silence of God. Yet Rublev ultimately finds peace through creation. That message was deeply comforting. "Tarkovsky gives me faith in cinema again," Bergman confessed. The film's visual grandeur impressed him. Long takes, meditative pacing, every frame alive. Tarkovsky could film wind rippling through grass and make it feel transcendent. Andrei Rublev, Bergman believed, turned suffering into a sacred act of seeing, a prayer in motion. He saw parallels between himself and Tarkovsky, both perfectionists obsessed with time, memory, and the human soul. Where Bergman wrestled with the absence of faith, Tarkovsky radiated belief. "He made me realize that cinema could reach beyond despair," Bergman told a colleague in the 1980s. Watching Andrei Rublev was like standing inside a cathedral built of light. Asked late in life if any film had truly changed him, Bergman answered without hesitation: "Andrei Rublev. It was not just a masterpiece," he said. "It was a revelation." As Ingmar Bergman approached the end of his life, his reflections on cinema revealed not arrogance but humility. He never saw himself standing above other filmmakers. Instead, he looked back in awe at the artists who had moved him, those who spoke a visual and emotional language he longed to master. His list: Andrei Rublev, La Strada, Rashomon, The Phantom Carriage, The Passion of Joan of Arc, Sunset Boulevard, reads like a roadmap of cinema's soul. From Tarkovsky, he learned that film could function as a prayer. From Fellini, that it could sing like a carnival. From Kurosawa, that truth is slippery and endlessly debatable. From Dreyer, that faith could be stripped bare. From Sjöström, that the silent image can speak louder than words. And from Wilder, that even cynicism and satire can hide a desperate yearning for meaning. These weren't just movies Bergman admired, they were conversations he continued throughout his career. You can feel The Phantom Carriage echoing through Wild Strawberries, La Strada in Through a Glass Darkly, Andrei Rublev in Fanny and Alexander. Each film he loved was a mirror reflecting his obsessions. The loneliness of faith, the fragility of art, the terror and beauty of human connection. Bergman often said that when he died, he hoped to wake up in a movie theater showing films by the masters he admired. Perhaps that is exactly what happened. His spirit forever seated among the flickering lights of cinema's history, watching and learning.